Greetings, friends, and Firebirds fans, and welcome to the Fire and Ice podcast presented by Desert Willow Golf Resort. Fire and Ice, the official podcast of your Coachella Valley Firebirds of the American Hockey League, coming to you from Palm Desert, California, a mere Layton Road freshly inked contract away from the Birds' home ice of Acrisure Arena. I'm your host, Judd Spicer, along with this bi-monthly podcast endeavor. Also, again, have the privilege and the pleasure of serving as your Firebirds insider. Those articles may be found online at cvfirebirds.com, which, of course, is your host and home for all things Coachella Valley Firebirds, including, but certainly not limited to, team, roster, news, merchandise, community information. Also a great way to get your Firebirds tickets. Might I also suggest downloading the very handy CV Firebirds app on your mobile device. Also an awesome way to get tickets for not just Firebirds games, but everything happening at Acrisure Arena, concerts, events, etc., and so forth. Per the presenting sponsor of this endeavor, Desert Willow Golf Resort, right here, also in sunny Palm Desert. Going to make it a great putt-to-puck day. Get in around at either the Mountain View or Firecliff courses over at Desert Willow. Slide it right on down 3+ miles over to the Birds' home ice of Acrisure Arena. And when you're making those tee times, by the way, at desertwillow.com, you also want to poke around, check out the awesome and on-site Palm Desert Golf Academy. Great way to refine your game, all manner of daily clinics, upwards of 3-day signature golf schools. Really an awesome facility to help brush up on your game. All right, dudes, not alone on this episode of the Fire and Ice podcast presented by Desert Willow. Got a great guest for you on this one. 5-time Stanley Cup champion, Hockey Hall of Famer, one of the greatest, 100 greatest players in NHL history. He was recognized as such back in 2017. Ever since the Birds hatched, he's been part of the broadcast team analysis on both the radio airwaves alongside our guy Evan Pivnik, and also doing television for the Birds TV broadcast. The great Grant Fuhr going to be joining me here shortly as we get down to the nitty and the gritty and the tick-tock of this Firebirds second season. With that, pull it back a little bit for the Firebirds Freeze Frame segment. 63 games down, a mere 9 to go. I think that officially puts us on the countdown for this second Firebirds season as we're ready. I think there's an itch. There's a growing enthusiasm and a vibe and an eagerness and a readiness. Let's get the playoffs underway. Why? Well, we got a 10-point edge over our nearest suitors. Record of 40, 14, 5, and 4, 89 points on the season. That, as mentioned, is tops in the Pacific Division. Also tops, I should add, in the Western Conference. 3-point edge currently over the Milwaukee Admirals. Those 89 points are good for second in the American Hockey League to, well, as many of you well know, our old nemesis, our new nemesis, the Hershey Bears. They still got the best record and point total in the American Hockey League. What's going to give you some enthusiasm, further enthusiasm, by the way, over the Firebirds season to date. 223 goals scored. That accounts for most in the Western Conference, while 162 goals allowed. That accounts for the fewest allowed in this same Western Conference. Let's take a peek at the Birds' schedule. And they haven't been here a lot, dudes. Yeah, we know this. They've been on the road for much of March. I think just 4 home games in the past 5 weeks. Well, fear not. That is going to change as we get here into April. 6 home games to round out the regular season. That's going to start this Thursday night, April 4th, 7 p.m. at puck drop against last place San Jose. Birds then hit the road for back-to-back in yonder Abbotsford this Saturday, April 6th, and Sunday, April 7th. Couple days off. Firebirds then return to Palm Desert and Acrisure Arena Wednesday, April 10th. That's a 7 p.m. start against a surging Ontario squad. And then Friday, April 12th, at home, 7 p.m. puck drop versus Bakersfield. Of the Firebirds' final 6 games of the season, 5 of them will take place here on our home ice. Had some comings and goings transactions of late. The Seattle Kraken are not going to make the playoffs this year. So a lot of our boys, our baby birds, our young guns, getting tastes, or in some instances, further tastes of NHL experience as again, Kraken rounded out. They are done on April 18th with their season. Shane Wright had a game-winning goal the other night as he went back up to the Kraken. Logan Morrison, recent guest on this program, he is up in the NHL right now, as is Ryan Winterton. He got a cup of coffee early in the year. He is now also back with the Kraken. Good news, once their season is concluded, all those boys will come back here, be in Coachella Valley Firebirds jerseys, along with Riker Evans, whom I readily trust will also be back for the AHL playoffs. A couple signees that we're probably also going to see, or likely to see certainly, in Firebirds jerseys to round out the regular season and then enter the playoffs. Among them, a fellow Minnesotan, got to mention White Bear Lake's own Leighton Road. Great hockey name, by the way. Hobie Baker Award finalist this year from Bemidji State, recently signed a 3-year contract with the Kraken. Very much looking forward to see forward Leighton Road in a Firebirds jersey, perhaps as early as this Thursday against San Jose. Per our other players, the established Firebirds, let's get into the leading scorers. Cole Lind, he still tops the list, 59 points thus far into the season. That is good for fourth in the American Hockey League. Cole has coupled 15 goals with 44 assists. Those 44 assists are good for third in the AHL. Not far behind, the captain Max McCormick, a team-high 28 goals, matched with 24 assists. Those 28 goals chart fourth in the AHL. Cameron Hughes, he's been having a great 2024. 22 goals and 29 assists. My Minnesota math says he has 51 cumulative points on the season to date. And Andrew Podorowski has again reached the 50-point threshold in the AHL. 14 goals and 36 assists, the fourth time in Potsy's career that he has reached that 50-point threshold in the AHL. Should be added that 1 year. I think it was, 2018. He actually had 49 points. Between the pipes, Chris Drieger continues his excellent season with the Birds, record of 21-6-5. Those 21 wins, are tied for 8th in the AHL. 2.32 goals against, that's good for 5th in the league, a save percentage of .915, tied for 8th in the AHL. Also seen an excellent season out of Ales Stejka, record of 15-6-2, goals against 2.50, save percentage basically the same as Chris, .913. All right, dudes, all that offered, all that prefaced, let's get to this episode's guest, a visit with the great Grant Fuhr. All right, Firebirds flock, as prefaced earlier in this episode of the Fire and Ice podcast, my guest for this episode, you know him, he's a great one. 5-time Stanley Cup champion, Hockey Hall of Famer, named one of the 100 greatest players in NHL history. We're so fortunate to have him since the outset of the Firebirds franchise, since they first cracked that egg. He's been with them since the beginning as an analyst on both radio and television. Grant Fuhr, welcome him to the Fire and Ice podcast. Hello, Grant.
How are you, Judd?
I am well, thank you, sir. Appreciate your time. Let's start big and broad. We're on the countdown now, just tick-tock till the end of this regular season, the second season, of course, of franchise history for the Firebirds. A mere 9 games to play. When you kind of look back at the beginning of this season, to the All-Star break, to where we are now, how do you see the arc of this second Firebird season?
You know what? I think it's trending in a good direction. And I think we get off to a little bit of a slow start, especially at home. But a lot of that, I think, has to do with new bodies in, where would we change over 7 or 8 guys. So it takes time to get a little bit of chemistry and such. And you look at last year, we started 20 in a row on the road. So they had a chance to build that chemistry, whereas this year you had to do it conventionally. So it may have taken a little bit more time. But at the same time, if you look at it build right to the All-Star break, it was getting better and better. And then coming out of the break, they've been phenomenal.
Absolutely. And those numbers and results speak for themselves. Had the recent 14-game point streak, which was snapped, although we won the game subsequent to that, but still points in something like 22 of the last 24. I mean, yeah, since the calendar turned to 2024, um, they've been exceptional in many respects. What about the way that they're playing of late has you particularly enthused?
You know what? I like the aggressive game that they play. We're a hard forechecking team, and when we keep the pace high and forecheck hard, it's hard for teams to play against us. And you're getting results because of that. And they don't get bullied by the bigger teams. I mean, you look at a team like Colorado, you look at Ontario. Yeah, we have a hard time playing them, but they don't get pushed around by them. So we might not be as big as last year, but I still think might be a little bit better roster than we had last year.
Yeah, in some respects, I would entirely agree with you. Just as I would concur that, I mean, it's a different makeup. It's a little bit different skill set, and I try to avoid in recent months, Grant, I'll compare and contrast to last year. But I mean, it's tough to do. At least I kind of finally stopped asking players about that because I think they were getting a little sick of it. But what we're seeing, and this is kind of leading to hopefully a salient point, but as you said, you know, the forecheck specifically seems much stronger to me. The makeup, even some of the playing schemes and philosophy, it's a little grittier, more blue collar style, I think, than some of the skating and stick handling skill set that we had last year. We were basically skating circles around a lot of teams. This is a little different makeup. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree with that. And every year is going to be a little bit different. I mean, this is the first year that we've had more than a couple of Seattle's draft picks. So you're seeing a younger team, which means different systems, different skill sets. So Dan's had to adjust to that. The players have had to adjust to that. And I think you're going to see that more and more over the years as Seattle has more draft picks. The team's going to get younger. You're going to get more turnover. And that's just the makeup of the game. I mean, that's the unfortunate part of the American Hockey League, but it's also the good part of the American Hockey League is you're going to get a lot of good young talent.
It's almost tough to ask or to say if this team in a certain respect is built for the playoffs maybe in a little better way than last year's team because obviously we took it to the distance last year save for one final game, but this team, the way I see it, they play a little tighter. The games for much of the season have been a little bit closer. I in some ways, I kind of feel like this team is a little more playoff postseason built than last year's team. Would you agree or disagree?
You know what? It's hard to compare the two teams because the setup's different. I mean, last year was a very veteran club. So you had a lot of guys that knew what to expect and such. Whereas this year we're a little bit younger. So it's going to be young guys getting a fresh look at the playoffs. And the playoffs are a different level of hockey. Everything goes up a gear. And it's a matter of whether you can adjust to that or not. So it'll be fun to watch this group in the first round of the playoffs and watch them build off of that. But again, it's not a given that you ever go a long ways in the playoffs. So it's going to be hard. That's the fun part of it. And we've played enough close games that it should be a playoff driven team.
I think so. And I don't know if you picked that up in your time around the players, but when they've come in post game, especially in recent months, whether it be win or lose, and it's mostly been win or at least grabbing a point, they just seem extremely. I think the word swagger has come up more than a few times at the arena and on this program, but they just seem extremely focused. And in the rare instances where they haven't won, or maybe they've got a point where they should have got two, they're upset. I mean, these guys seem just completely focused. I don't know, being around the arena, being around the team, if you picked up that same vibe of late.
You know what? It's good to see a team with swagger. I mean, I think that's the one thing is there's enough guys that were there last year that got a taste of that final. And I know just from playing that when you get a taste of the final, you want to be back there again. And the regular season is a building block to get to that final. So, yeah, you take pride in winning. You take pride in how you play the game. And it's a good sign when guys are upset that they lose. I mean, for as much as we've won a bunch of hockey games, it's pretty easy to say, well, that's kind of a one off. I know as broadcasters, we do that once in a while. It's just a one off, but the players are taking it serious and it's not a one off to them. It's they drop the ball and they want to be better. So that's a good sign when you're going into the playoffs.
Yeah, we referenced some of the other teams and some of the tight games. You specifically spoke of Colorado and Ontario. I think the general consensus is that Pacific Division as a whole is markedly better and more competitive last year, where there were basically three teams that they were pretty junky, man. I mean, those were kind of automatic wins. Now, for the most part, I mean, those the like three teams behind us, they are solid, man. I don't know if any team in particular, Colorado, Tucson, again, Ontario, if any of those give you some particular concern in a eventual playoff series.
You know what? The whole division as a whole got better. I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing is you look at Tucson's a big surprise. And they've got markedly better. They're going to get better come playoff time because Phoenix is going to send them some players. So they're going to be better. Colorado's had a great year. They're a big physical team, so they're hard to play against. You can't sleep on a team like Bakersfield. For some reason, we have a hard time playing against Bakersfield. You look at Abbotsford. Abbotsford's done a good job of beating everybody else, but they have a tough time with us. So any of the teams that make the playoffs, if you're not playing your best hockey, you can get beat. And teams have showed that over the course of the year that most of the teams have played pretty well against us.
Yeah, I would agree. One of the things I asked Dan Bilesma about a couple months ago, and it was something that just eventually occurred to me over again the arc of this season, was that some of those teams playing so well against us that they are coming to Acrisure Arena or perhaps hosting the Firebirds with extra motivation. Like, here's this new team, beautiful arena. We got this crazy mascot flying all over the place. Now we're back in first place. Um, that I don't want to say those other teams or franchises are necessarily jealous, but it occurred to me that they're throughout the season that most other teams have been giving the Firebirds their best, that they're a little extra motivated to come beat Coachella Valley.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think last year we might have snuck up on a couple of teams, whereas this year we're not sneaking up on anybody. Everybody knows we're a good hockey club. And when you realize you get to a final, you're going to see the best from everybody. And if you look at the Pacific Division, everybody went out and got better. I mean, I think that's a sign of what the Firebirds did last year is everybody else knew they had to get better and it's become more competitive. And last year was kind of a two-horse race. If you look at it, I mean, between Coachella Valley and Calgary, it was kind of the two-horse race. They were heads and tails better than everybody, but you can't say that this year. I think that's the other thing is, yes, we've had a great year, but everybody starts at zero come playoff time. And you look at, we played Tucson last year. It went to the limit. You go to the next round against Colorado, goes to the limit. The only one that didn't was Milwaukee. So
And that
it
went
just
six.
shows you it went 6 out of the 7, and then we dragged everything else to 7. So it just shows you the parallel of hockey once playoff starts.
Yeah. A couple of those particular facets, as you see it, Grant, of real keys of playoff hockey. And yes, we're not there yet. We still got a chunk of April to finish out these last 9 games, but just as kind of a look ahead, a couple of real success markers, things that you really want to see your team excelling with on in the playoffs. Obviously, wins and outcome aside, but what are a couple facets that you are really intending to focus on from the broadcast booth that are going to show the Firebirds are playing well?
I think you got to look at special teams. Special teams always become a key come playoff time. You want to look at your defensive zone. Right? Good defense wins playoff games. You're not going to get the 7-5, the 5-1 games. Yeah, you get the odd one sprinkled in, but most of the games are going to be close. They're going to come down to that last 10 minutes. And you look at how in games that don't mean a lot, how good do you play in those last 10 minutes? How competitive are you through that 60 minutes? Because you realize that it doesn't matter as much, but you still want to have all the good habits going into the playoffs.
As I mentioned earlier in this episode, the Firebirds lead the Western Conference in goals and also have allowed the fewest goals in the Western Conference, both great metrics. That said, is there anything without being too critical, I guess, but anything that you're keeping an eye on that might give you a little concern, perhaps an area of the Firebirds game where over the course of these um, April games, as we finish the schedule, get into the postseason, you'd like to see him improve on a little bit.
It's not so much that I want to see them improve on anything. You want to see them play their pace, their game, not play down to the competition. And I think that's the dangerous thing when you get into those last 8, 9 games. You've already guaranteed yourself a playoff spot. It's easy to take the foot off the gas pedal. And I know when Edmonton, we wanted to keep the foot on the gas pedal going into the playoffs because you want to play your best hockey going in, not necessarily when you get there. You want to play your best going in. So it's the last 9 games here are going to be the build off of, and that's the momentum you're going to carry and ride into the playoffs.
We talked about personnel, something that we learned in a really invaluable lesson about the American Hockey League last year, which NHL parent club does make the playoffs, which don't. You referenced Tucson, of course. They gave us a good battle in that first round by virtue of getting a lot of guys back to the AHL roster that had a good amount of NHL ice time from last year. Now it's a little different for the Firebirds in that Seattle's season is basically over. They're not going to make the playoffs. So our young guys have got that opportunity. We got Shane Wright recently called up, scored the game-winning goal. Logan Morrison, Ryan Winterton are up there right now getting that NHL experience. When the Kraken season ends on April 18th, of course, we're going to get those guys back. Soon we're going to get Riker Evans back as well. What do you think it means to those guys to get that NHL experience, even if it's just a taste? We know Shane Wright's been up there before, and Ryan Winterton had a cup of coffee earlier this year. But what do you think it's ultimately going to mean for all these guys? I mean, a nice chunk of our Firebirds roster to get that taste, then come back down here for the AHL postseason.
I think the taste gives you a feeling of where you want to be. And the way that you get there is by having a great playoff. And I think the guys know that. I think they realize that. So getting that NHL taste, seeing what that pace is like, gives them a benefit when they come back down because now they know that there's a pace that they have to play at to be successful in the National Hockey League. And it'll serve them well when it comes playoff time here because the pace is going to go up in the playoffs. It always does. The physicality goes up in the playoffs. The rules change a little bit, much as the leagues hate to say that they do, but they change a little bit. So it's a good experience for them because they're playing meaningful minutes in the National Hockey League and they're playing against some good teams. So they get to see, they get a look and they get a feel for how the game's played at that level.
It's tough or perhaps incorrect or improper, Grant, to use the word or ever use the word easier when it comes to professional sports, certainly at this level. But when these guys go get those NHL games and then come back down to the American Hockey League, is it in any way appear an easier game, do you sense, for them?
It's not an easier game. It's a different game because now you get an extra half second to make plays, sometimes almost a full second. So the game will seem like it's slowed down a little bit without really slowing down. So you get when you're in the National Hockey League, all the plays that you make have to be done that much quicker. So they get used to reacting quicker. And when you come back, playoff time, everything's going to have to be quicker. So it's a big benefit for them to have played a bunch of games up in the NHL.
It's a great description, Grant. And it is exactly, it's the thesis of what we saw with Ty Cartier last year when we enjoyed his return. He just seemed a little faster all of a sudden than basically everybody else.
Yeah, the decisions come faster, which makes you look faster. And I think that's the great part about it is people don't realize, yeah, the game's fast at the American League level, but it's another step faster once you get to the National Hockey League level. So it does nothing but benefit those guys to get some games in up there.
Of course, last year we enjoyed throughout the season and deep into the playoffs throughout all of it. The most popular player, Joey Decord, the leader emotionally, I think, for the Firebirds, and whom many would describe as our best player last year. He's enjoyed a lot of success in Seattle, although the Kraken have had certainly a tough season. But Joey's had a lot of great games this season. Of course, we've got Chris Drieger, 21, 6-5. All his metrics are in the top 10 in the AHL. And Alex Stejka is also, he's grown throughout the season. But in the playoffs, man, you can do all the things that we talked about. You can play the game a little bit tighter, forechecking, everything can just be a little bit stronger, a little bit tighter. But you got to have a hot goal. I mean, to get deep, deep into the playoffs, you got to have somebody that's really locking it down. How do you feel about both Drieger and Stejka and how they played throughout the season?
I thought they've been good. I mean, Chris was in a difficult spot. You're coming back on the last year of a deal, and he's performed, I think, better than a lot of people thought. And he's been really good. Alish, it took a little bit to get comfortable in the smaller building, but he's been really good as well. So you've got a couple of hot guys going into the playoffs. It's a comfortable spot for a coach. And come playoff time, your goalie's the difference. It doesn't matter how good your team is. Your goalie's going to be the difference, good or bad. And that's the beauty of playoff time for a goalie, is you make a difference every game.
Joey Decord, very unique goaltender, and you and I talked about him a few times last year. Kind of a very athletic, very cavalier, very aggressive style. What do you see about either or both the Chris Drieger or Stejka styles of play or skill sets that have you confident that they can lead us back to the Calder Cup Finals?
You know what? I think they're a little more patient. They're bigger goalies. And I think Stetch is 6'5". I think, what is he? Probably 6'4". So when both goalies are big, they're a little more patient. Whereas Joey was a little bit smaller and a little more aggressive. They're a little more patient, and they've both made big saves when we needed them. And that's what you're going to want to see in the playoffs is, can you make that one save that's going to change a game, change a series? And they're both very capable of doing that.
Friends, you're tuning into the Fire and Ice podcast presented by Desert Willow Golf Resort. My guest is five-time Stanley Cup champion, Hockey Hall of Famer Grant Fuhr. He has served as the Firebirds analyst for both radio and television broadcasts since the franchise's inception, he tried to say. Let me ask this, Grant. A couple things we also talked about when we did an article last year for the Firebirds Insider on the cbfirebirds.com website. You laughed, I think, when I asked you if you were a better broadcaster or a better player. And at the time, you said that you thought that you were a better player. Now, in your second year in the booth, would you still answer the same way?
Oh, I still a much better player. There's no question. I mean, I enjoy sitting talking about hockey, and I love the game, and I love kind of breaking the game down, but I'm a much better player than I am a broadcaster.
But do you think that you've improved now in this second year in the booth? You feel like you've gotten better?
I'm getting more comfortable. I don't know if I'm any better, but we're getting more comfortable, and it's easy working with Evan. Evan's phenomenal. Gino's phenomenal. So they've made the job really easy for me, which allows me to just sit and talk about hockey. And I can sit and talk hockey all day long. So we're in a comfortable spot.
It's interesting in that, and I don't want to get too tangential here, but former great players, they don't always translate to either great coaches in their respective sports or great broadcasters. And I don't want to, again, get off on a tangent about which players I think have been compelling on the field or on the ice or on the court that just never translated to great broadcasters. Their personalities weren't able to cross over into media. But for you and your style, I love the way you call games, man. Everything feels tight. It feels very succinct. I don't know. Do you feel like that you've carried over some of the skills that brought you to the Hall of Fame into the broadcast booth?
I try and explain the game the same way I would look at it. I mean, if the game of hockey is the game of hockey, it's how you look at it. I know when I coached, it's the same way. You have to understand your players. You have to try and figure out what the players are thinking, what makes them tick. Well, it's not a whole lot different broadcasting. You kind of have to try and figure out what the players are thinking, how they understand the game. And you don't want to be overly critical, but you also don't want to be soft on them. So it's kind of finding a happy medium where you're honest with the fans as to how it's going, but at the same time, you're not overly critical.
As a player, obviously, I can only imagine that you're in all those Stanley Cup finals and winning championships. As the season got deeper and you got further into the playoffs, that there's more adrenaline, there's more vibe, there's more energy. Did you feel that last year from the broadcast booth as we got deeper into the Calder Cup finals?
Oh, no, I still get the same feeling come playoff time. I love playoffs. So I know if our guys aren't playing, I curl up on the couch here and I'll watch playoff hockey from first game through to the last game. So I still like the playoffs. I still like being around it. And it's an excitement that you can't duplicate. I think that's the fun part of it. And the fans have been pretty fortunate here with a long run last year. And I expect the guys to have a good run this year.
One of the other things we talked about when we did that article, and your answer surprised me a bit when I'd asked if you'd become chummy with the Firebirds players by virtue, of course, of being a former player, by virtue of being around the arena a lot. Those guys have played a lot of golf. You are an avid and fine player, but you told me that yeah, you play with them a little bit, and obviously, talk to them a lot around the building, but that it felt important to you to keep a little bit of an arm's distance. You're working in a broadcast uh, spot where you didn't want to get too chummy. You didn't want to get too close. You still wanted to be in a spot where perhaps if need be, you could be critical of something. I don't know. Has that continued over into year two where you've been friendly with the players, but not necessarily friends?
Yeah, I think that's part of broadcasting. I think you like to have that separation. And yeah, I played golf with a few of the guys. I enjoy hanging out with them, but at the same time, you have to give them their space as well. I mean, they've got a coaching staff that's going to help them through things, and you have to let the coaches do their thing. And you're a broadcaster, so you stick to the broadcast side. And yeah, if they've got questions or anything, I'm happy to answer them. But at the same time, you don't want to be down in their face all the time and be overbearing with it. So it allows me to sort of be independent. And I think that's a big part of broadcasting is you have to be able to tell the bad with the good.
Are there perhaps instances now that we've had guys, just a few come to mind, veteran players that have now been with us for the bulk of both of these years? Max McCormick, Cole Lind, Andrew Podorowski, these guys have all been been around the block. I thought maybe your answer would be a little bit different now that you've known these guys for a couple years instead of a couple months, but it doesn't seem like it's changed that much, even with the veteran players.
No, I still try and keep a little bit of space, but at the same time, you see the guys, you're friendly with the guys, you can hang out with the guys, but I still like to keep that where, I mean, we've been pretty fortunate with all the winning that he's done over the first 2 years. There hasn't been a whole lot to be critical about. So you got to be able to create that space where if things do go sour, you can still be critical without offending anybody.
The goalies, and we can name names or we don't have to, but have they potentially availed themselves of your expertise, pick your brain a little bit?
Yeah, I've talked to them a little bit when the younger guys were up. Talked to them for a little bit. I think they did a phenomenal job when they came up. Cale Morris and Jack LaFontaine. I thought the organization's done a great job of having depth. And it's one of the hardest positions in the game to have depth at. So I feel we're pretty fortunate there. I think we've got a young Finnish kid coming over next year. So the depth is really good for the club. And it bodes well for Seattle as there's depth there. So you can move guys up and down. And you look at Joey stepping in Seattle this year. They've done a really good job of recruiting guys at a position that come playoff time becomes extremely important.
Yeah, I think across the board, whether it be between the pipes or all over the ice, Ron Francis, I mean, his draft picks have been pretty much A plus, man. I mean, the youth that he's brought in and we've seen on ice last year and this year, it's been exemplary.
Yeah, I have to agree. And the young kids have stepped in and they've been really good. I mean, we weren't sure what we had at the start of the year, but they've gotten better as the year's gone on. So I'm really curious and interested to see them, to see if they can go that next step, which is playoffs, which the game gets another step faster. The adrenaline gets a little harder, a little higher. So it's going to be fun to watch them.
Speaking of fun to watch, and let's close out with this one. Next month, May 17 and 18, I want to say it's the fourth annual Grand Fuhr Celebrity Invitational. We've got an evening, I believe, at Hotel Paseo, followed by a round with our sponsor at Desert Willow Golf Resort. Fourth go around for this. Did I get that right, Grant?
Fourth go around. Well, probably about sixth if you count COVID in there where we had to reschedule it a couple of times. But yeah, fourth go around. So we've got a bunch of good guys coming in again and have some fun and raise a bunch of money for the children's program over at the Betty Ford Center. So it's something that's near and dear to our heart, and it's a great cause.
It is, and you'll suffer me for not mentioning that. Yeah, benefiting the Hazelden Betty Ford Children's Center. You've also done so much work with your eponymous Grand Fuhr Foundation. I looked at the celebrity list for 2024. I think that these were updated, although those may have been last year, but you've brought in some great friends and great jocks and great celebrities to go knock it around in the desert and go play at Desert Willow. I think last year, like Bo Jackson might have been there. The list I
Yeah, Bo
looked
came
at.
out. Bo comes out. Marcus Allen, Marshall Falk. So we get a little from everywhere. So we get some actors. We got baseball, football. We got a little basketball. Ron Harper came out last year. So we try and bring in a little bit of everything.
Well, if there's an open spot for year number 4 that maybe doesn't get signed up, that yours truly, I'd love to play with Marcus Allen. He was number 32, kind of my idol growing up. But I try. I know the event has gotten super popular. I don't anticipate too many open spots. But for those that are interested in playing, you're gonna want to check out the Grand Fuhr Celebrity Invitational again, May 17th and 18th, with the golf round on the latter day taking place at Desert Willow Golf Resort. Grant, thank you so much for your time. Enjoyed listening to you on the broadcast, and I think that we are simpatico and on the same page, and hoping that by the time your event rolls around, and then in the month ensuing into June, that you and I are both still talking Firebirds hockey, man.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks for your time.
All right, thanks, Judd.
All right, Firebirds friends. To wrap it up for this episode of the Fire and Ice podcast presented by Desert Willow Golf Resort. So appreciative of your continued and ongoing time, your interest, your ears, your support of this endeavor. Additional appreciation, of course, goes to this episode's guest, Grant Fuhr, Firebirds analyst for both radio and television, and of course, 5-time Stanley Cup champion and Hockey Hall of Famer. Always a pleasure to chat with Grant. Further gratitude, of course, goes to the presenting sponsor of this endeavor, Desert Willow Golf Resort. And dude, it's not just one of the finest municipal or public facilities here in Southern California, the desert, but really, truly, in the entire West Coast. Get your tee times online for either or both the Mountain View and Firecliff courses, respectively, at desertwillow.com. When you're on there, poking around, be sure to check out the awesome and on-site Palm Desert Golf Academy. Again, briefly, upcoming schedule for the Firebirds season as we round out year number 2 of CB Firebirds hockey here in the regular season. I said again, this Thursday, April 4th, at home, 7 p.m. puck drop against San Jose. Birds then hit the road this Saturday and Sunday, the 6th and the 7th, respectively, back-to-back at Abbotsford. A couple days off, then CB returns to Palm Desert and Acrisure Arena. Should be a good one Wednesday, April 10th, against a very solid Ontario Reign club. That's a 7 p.m. start, and then round out next week on Friday, April 12th, 7 p.m. start against Bakersfield. Again, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Things are heating up here late in the season. A lot of momentum, a lot of vibe. We'll look forward to celebrating it all. See you soon at the Bird's Nest of Acrisure Arena. Until then, and always, remember, one valley, one team, rising together.